After many weeks of our group splitting up and working on different experiments, we wanted to bring the whole group back together and work on one large project that might result in a finished project. Combining all our work and research, a few things became very clear. First, we wanted to play around with more audience perspectives, both in and out of VR. Then, interaction would be done more through natural use of the body than to use buttons or a clear set goals in raw gameplay. Some audience members would be at multiple points in space and time, while others wouldn't be. We started by experimenting with objects attached to trackers and also with cameras that were linked digitally and physically. From real life to Neos, but also from Neos to real life. The first being the one that was the most interesting and the one that we would use in our performance. We did these smaller experiments to test out multiple ways to connect virtual with physical and to see how well they worked. Linking the different tech together was priority number one. If our project wouldn't be functional, then we wouldn't start building it. We created setups with a Vive VR, trackers, a phone camera and a webcam, streaming and projecting the area around one player with beamers. We created a complicated setup that seemed impressive at first, but without a goal quickly became meaningless. We built some sets, working out these audience perspectives in different settings, sketching out the use of actors, active participants and passive audience members. One of our main focuses was the idea of layers, worlds existing on top of each other. There was the Neos world, but also the physical space. And how do these interact with each other? When watching from a certain perspective, what parts do you get to see from the other world? Our first concept included 4 people in VR and a 5th holding a phone. The 4 audience members in VR would play out certain scenes together with actors, while the person in the middle holding the phone could watch these from a distance. This evolved into the scene switched around, 1 person in VR and 4 audience members in a physical space. We discussed multiple themes like dementia and face blindness, where the VR player would see things and hear things the others couldn't, while the Neos players would randomly join or physical players would be swapped around with an actor in the eyes of the VR user. This could create confusion and ultimately tell the tale of someone who is affected by the inability to perceive things as they might be. We got incredibly lost in this mess of technology and complicated meta structures of performing. We realized from our previous experiments that without a clear narrative to build towards, you quickly lose yourself in difficult structures of your work. And this doesn't mean a vague story or a meta-narrative that we wanted to tell. It meant lines, dialogue, a script. So Robin went to remove himself from the projects for a day, just to write whatever comes up, even if it doesn't have anything to do with the settings that we created. Out came a few short stories, 3 of which are used in the final performance in Junk. From there on, the project gained a lot of speed. There would be objects that these stories were attached to. When interacting with them in the right way, which was still a bit vague at the time, would trigger these stories and you would experience them through different perspectives. From here on in the process, the stories themselves never changed, but the settings did. A long time we worked towards the building of a thrift shop, where audience members would come to experience the history of objects left by their owners. In another narrative, you would be experiencing someone with dementia, having to refine their own memories through objects and the stories. We also worked out different concepts of the physical set. We started with a see-through curtain to separate the interacting audience members from the observing ones. It would also function as a layer between projection. Beaming video through it would result in both the curtain and the back of the wall being projected on. After a discussion about the aesthetics and the functionality of it, it just didn't feel right. We decided on a white line on the ground. The curtain made it that audience members felt separated from each other because it went down to the floor all the way from the high ceiling, and it felt kind of nauseating and limiting one's inability to freely move around. We settled with just a square on the ground, with white lines presenting the edges. This would act as a sort of metaphysical membrane that would separate the audiences inside of the performance space from those outside of it. This same membrane would exist in VR, where VR audience members would feel the presence of this border. This imaginary play space, the magic circle in which the performance was happening, was easier to imagine for audience members with just a white line, which was a lot more pleasant and non-intrusive as well. Only a few days before the performance, we made a 180 and went for the narrative that we have set now. This was caused by multiple tests that we did, and together with Stefan and Joris came to the conclusion that it was all too complex and would end up confusing our audience. So we gave the audience members a more simple role: interact with an object and then just watch. We put it in an easier to understand setting that didn't require our physical audience to take on a role or remember too much. It also made it so that our project moved away from realism and went more towards the metaphysical aspect of objects, able to be shown in a visually and narratively poetic way.